Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston-upon-Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston-upon-Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Liam Rogers. Liam is the director of TEDxKingstonUponThames, a program of local, self-organised events that bring people together to share ideas worth sharing. What's unique about Liam is how he derives his energy from being creative and building new projects. So much so that he launched his latest project, Speaker Circle, on the back of being put on furlough during the first COVID-19 lockdown. And be sure to listen to the end, where Liam shares with us how he's managed to draw inspiration from some of the business setbacks that he's experienced throughout his life. So whether you're interested in knowing more about TEDxKingstonUponThames, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Liam Rogers, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Liam, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, I'm a big fan of the TED project worldwide. And given that you're the director of the TEDxKingstonUponThames project, I think that our listeners are going to get a lot out of learning a bit more about this from you. But before we kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So Liam, where did you grow up?
I grew up, surprise, in Kingston-upon-Thames.
Fantastic. Nice place to grow up in.
I know. And actually, it took me many years to appreciate how nice it really is. So I was born in Kingston Hospital in a building that's no longer there. So I was born in midair, which makes me sound very dramatic. But yeah, I'm from Kingston. Born and bred. I lived here for 18 years, and then I went to university in Southampton. And then I sort of had a little bit of a tour around various different places, moved to South London, then moved out to Kent with my husband. And then we were there for 5 years, and then we moved back to Kingston. And awesome. It was then when I realized, actually, Kingston's a really nice area.
Very cool.
I don't know why I didn't think that earlier. I think it was, I grew up in the area and I enjoyed my childhood growing up more in New Malden. Actually, my parents still live in New Malden. But it wasn't until I sort of realized quite how nice it is to be close to central London, but also be close to being out of London. And you've got I think in Kingston, you've got a bit of the best of both worlds. And now people who are looking to buy or move to a different part of London, I'm just saying, move to Kingston.
That's it. Or at least consider the area, because there's a lot going on here for sure. Absolutely. Liam, you mentioned university there. What did you study at university?
So when I went to Southampton, I studied film. So I studied film studies. Film studies is kind of actually in some ways, it's my first love, is film. I grew up just as a proper film buff, just watching every single film I could get my hands on. And my parents didn't really pay attention to what films I was watching. I watched literally everything and anything, from the most horrific horror films to the most like dramatic dramas that were really grown up for a kid to be watching, to like Disney films that I just loved as well. So I grew up watching films. And then I was like, I kind of want to study this more. So I did this course, which was like 50% practical, so it was actually making films, and then 50% theoretical, so it was a bit like a sort of literature degree where you look back over the history of film and then you write essays and assess the history of film. And I still love that. I'm still sort of in that world. Maybe I'll talk about that later, but I'm still sort of in that world. But that was my first love. It was kind of when I was a kid, it was what I was known for. I had a video camera and I would make horror films with my friends where it would end up being like I literally made a slasher film with my friends where I basically just killed them all, bumped them all off in a slasher film. And I was like, this is so much fun. So that was it. I studied film And Southampton was a really nice town, but it was not somewhere I wanted to stay long term. When I wanted to be away from London and sort of away from my family, I wanted to be far enough away that I was away, but not too far away that I was like, I need something. Can you come and give me things? I need food. Can you come and give me things? So I was a bit of best of both worlds, like 3 hours away, but not too far away, but not too close.
Absolutely. And look, in preparation for this chat, I had a look at your profile page, and I understand that your first short film, I think it was called Ignorance, it was called the most controversial film of the year by the 2008 National Student Film Festival. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so it was, and it wasn't that controversial. It was technically meant to be leading up to our final film that we were meant to make at the end of it. And when I was at university, and this says a lot about me, I just didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. I wanted to go against the grain. And I was watching a lot of international sort of world cinema art films, and a lot of like art films, like things that you would see more likely see in a gallery than in a cinema. And I just started to immerse myself in like queer cinema. So LGBT cinema, but it's called queer film. So I spent a lot of time watching those sorts of films. Then when it came to we had to make a final film, and I made this like experimental short film, which for the time, 2008, it was a man dressed in drag, and it was meant to be he was kind of doing his final performance as this character, and he basically strips. So he strips and he's naked. That's the controversial part of it, is that there is
not that controversial.
There is a naked man in this film. And you won't find it online anymore. It's not available anymore. And it was me. I was being experimental. And also for me, I was 19. I was, I'm a gay man. I'm married to a man. And at the time, I guess when I was at university, I was sort of also like coming to terms with my sexuality. And I guess you could read into all of that as well. But it was me being experimental with my art, my creativity, my filmmaking, but it was also being like experimental with this idea about sexuality. And actually at the time it was kind of controversial, and it got very well received in the university, but then it also I submitted it to some festivals, and it actually did quite well at some festivals. And I went to see it it was in Bristol at the National Student Film Festival, and they showed the film with an audience, and people were literally heckling the film and like booing it and watching this film literally in disgust. And I sat in the audience just like, what am I doing? Why am I here? It was actually kind of interesting. It was actually sort of awful, but at the time I was just like, screw you guys. Like this your response to your response to my film says more about you than it does about me.
100%. Yeah.
And at the time it was up for an award at this festival, and we didn't win the award. It was nominated, but we didn't win. But at the time I was also a little bit like, I don't want to win the award because I don't want to have to go onto that stage.
Yeah.
Because although I was also confident in myself, but I was a bit like, what am I going to say to them? And I literally thought to myself, that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say your negative reaction to my film says everything about you, and it doesn't say anything about my film, apart from the fact that it evoked this feeling in you.
I think there's a huge lesson there for anybody listening. There's a huge lesson there, and probably most importantly than any lesson is just how far we've come since 2008, which is recent. I mean, it's just the other day was 2008 as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think it was like, I personally don't think it was like a sort of homophobic thing, or personally, I think it was students. They were seeing a naked man's like dangly bits on screen. And also you don't really see anyone, like in the film, he's like quite far away. You can't really see much. It's very artfully like photographed, but I think it was also a juvenile thing. It was a student thing. They were just like, oh, we don't know. Also, don't know how to react to this film. I guess it was a lesson in, like, you might have made this thing, but you don't know how people are going to react. And also when you put it out, and I guess you could apply this to business, when you put it out into the world, you don't know what people are going to like take from it. Yeah, it was an interesting learning curve. I then watched it at some other screenings, and which were far better to watch. But I watched it at a screening in London around the same time, and it was like pin silence the audience, and this was a full audience as well. It was a reasonably big cinema, and you could hear like a pin drop in the audience. They were just like in stunned silence, not because it was shocking, but I think they were a bit like, what am I watching? What am I watching?
And it's interesting you say that, Liam, because this allows us to segue into something that I think is really interesting, and that's you being the director of the TEDxKingstonUponThames project and events.
Yeah.
And I want you to sort of tee this up for the listeners rather than me, but I think the principle behind TED as a global project is this phrase that they use, I think is so powerful: ideas worth sharing. And at times, even from TED presentations, I have had a reaction to a speech that I've seen a few years ago, which just didn't hit me at the right time. And I might have been either silent, or I might have actually turned the telly off midway and switched to another video. And then a few years later, watched it again. And because of the life experience I had along the way, really taking the message that the speaker was trying to transmit to me in a completely different way. And I think that would go for pretty much any movie that I've watched, books that I've read, and I'm sure it's the same for the speakers that you put on TEDx Kingston upon Thames and the messages or the ideas that they're trying to share. So for the listeners who are not familiar with the TED concept or the independently organized TEDx events as well, would you mind just talking to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, you summed it up really nicely. TED has been going for quite a long time, and it started as it was like combating the boring conferences that all of these guys were going to. I think it started off in the 80s, and they were going to all these boring conferences where people were delivering these keynote speeches for half an hour to 45 minutes, and I think they were bored. I mean, I would say there's still an element of that. I would still also say to people, I would keep your keynote speech down to as short as possible and like captivate your audience rather than boring them. And I think that's where it came out of. That's why the TEDx sort of rules are that the talks have to be a maximum of 18 minutes. So it's kind of, to a certain extent, although you can have more than one person on a stage, it is one person on a stage delivering an idea in 18 minutes, captivating the audience. And how can they sum up what it is that they want to say? Because sometimes the ideas that they have are something they kind of almost need to convince the audience of. How do they make it personal? Why are they the person to deliver this talk? And it started from there. And then I think that they were actually quite ahead of their time in that they would record every single talk, and then they would all go online for free. So anyone can watch a TEDx talk. Anyone can watch any TEDx talk in history online for free. And I think that's the revolutionary thing. If you think they started, I think it was in the 80s, then and like the YouTube internet video revolution, they were kind of ahead of that, and then they came up when YouTube suddenly became the big thing that it is today. But for me, it's the event actually that I think is the biggest thing. But for us, for TEDx Kingston, so they're often happening in California, New York, Canada, and they mostly in America, sometimes elsewhere, but they're like the big events, and the people that are speaking are basically like famous people. They have like the biggest stars, and also the biggest sort of leaders in their industry. They get invited to the TED Talks, and also to attend one of those events. If you want to go to a TED event, it's like £10,000 for a ticket. It's very, very expensive. TEDx, so you put the X on it. The X is a sort of regional, more local version of a TED event. Now, there's only 1 or 2 TED events a year, but there are thousands of TEDx events all around the world constantly. Maybe not really recently for obvious reasons, they haven't been able to happen. So we manage it. We're managed independently. So anyone listening to this wants to set up their own TEDx event, they can do that. Anyone can do it. You effectively apply for the license for the name. So we have the license for TEDx Kingston upon Thames, and it is a bit first come, first serve. Whoever was the person that started it in their area first will get the name. They make you fill out a form and answer questions, but they're not. I don't think they're too. They're not too strict on who can and who can't do it. But the biggest one in the UK is really TEDx London. That's been going for quite a few years. And it was actually my husband who had the idea of TEDxKingstonUponThames. And he got me involved because at the time I was working in events, but also my day job is marketing. So I was like, well, I can help you out with the event. It's a big event. I can help you out there. And then marketing, I was like, well, marketing is what I do day in, day out. So I can help you sell the tickets, basically.
Yeah.
And it started from there.
Yeah. And, it's from the people that I've spoken to in and around Kingston who have attended TEDxKingstonUponThames, the feedback is awesome. So you've obviously been able to attract some really interesting people who have really interesting ideas worth sharing, right?
Yeah. So it started in 2006 was our first event. We actually 5th of November is our event anniversary, and it just happened. And it's easy to remember because of the 5th of November. There's often fireworks going off. But we started it sort of early 2006. Oh, sorry. We started it early 2016, and then the event was in November. The first event that you do when you do set up, say you start your TEDx event, you've been given the name, you're allowed to do it. They give you effectively what TEDx give you is the branding. You have that TEDx name, you have that branding, and then they give you the rules. They've quite a strict set of rules. They're rules, but they're sort of guidelines as well. There are certain, you're not going to suddenly be like, no, we're not going to do the 18-minute talk, then we're going to do 30-minute talks, because that obviously is completely against what they want. So you follow their rules, they follow their guidelines, but what you do with it and who is on your stage ultimately is up to you. So we did our first one in 2016. It was at Kingston University, and for the first event that you do, you can only have an audience of 100. And I think that's because if it goes horribly wrong, it's only 100 people or less. So they can be like, oh, the feedback was terrible, we don't want you to do this again, just forget about it. And it's only 100 people. So they set that up. Then after that, there are a few things you have to through hoops you have to jump through, but then you can expand from the 100. So the first one at Kingston University, we selected mostly local people. We didn't do a huge amount of coaching. In the same, now we have a speaker coach who coaches them before they go onto the Rose Theatre stage, but then we didn't really have a coach. So it was a bit okay, we can see that you could deliver a TEDx talk. You're a local person, you have a thing that you want to talk about, and then we would sort of meet with them a few times. They would deliver it, we would give them feedback, and then they'd be on the stage with mixed results because some people do need coaching and some people don't need coaching, is how I would say. But the feedback was really good. We had a full day of talks and it was really good. Then from there, we decided to scale up really big. We went from 100 to 900 at the Rose Theatre. In between, whilst we were planning the 900 event, which was the first one in 2018, we did some small salon events. These are smaller ones. We did one at Ravens 8, which is the event space in Surbiton that I actually used to work at. And then we did one at the Corner House in Tolworth. And then the third one was at the Quaker Centre in Kingston. So we did these small little ones around in the community with 4 speakers each. Then when we went for the Rose, to be quite honest, I was like, being a slightly pessimist, I was like, I don't know if we're going to be able to sell 900 tickets. We sold 100 actually quite easily. It was pretty effortlessly sold, and I didn't have to do that much marketing. So we knew that there was an appetite for it. But when it came to 900, I was like, oh, that's a
big event.
But yeah, that's a big event, and also maybe a tough one. But the way that the Rose is split out, it's kind of in tiers, and the bottom section and the middle section is about 550. So I was like, you know what, let's aim for 500, between 500 and 600, which will fill the bottom section. And then the top section, maybe we just give those tickets away for free, or we don't worry about them. So that was the initial ambition, and long story short, we sold out the whole thing.
Fantastic.
We started off selling the main seats, and then we were like, no, there really is an appetite here. It did take a lot more effort marketing wise. We built up our team, we made the team bigger, and I guess it was at that point when we were like, there are going to be 900 people in this audience. That's actually a significant amount that we found, or she found us. We found Tara, our speaker coach, who came on board. She actually came on board earlier when we were doing some of the salon events, but we actually couldn't really have done that event without someone like Tara coaching them through. And then she managed to in some ways, helped get the quality of the speakers up to the level of how many people were going to be in the audience. 900 people is quite a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of people.
And I have been on that stage, and it's not that intimidating, but you can sense that there are a lot of eyes on you when you're on that stage.
Yeah, and it's fantastic the way you've said it there, because you're absolutely right. Look, in my profession, I go to conferences. I go to conferences internationally because for me it's interesting to bring back ideas into our firm in Kingston that would give our clients the best of financial planning and wealth management from all over the world. But you're absolutely right, Liam. There are a lot still to this day. There are a lot of speakers who, either for lack of coaching or for lack of actually just being briefed properly by the event organizer, they literally read from their slides. And to sit through that in 2020, I mean, granted, 2020 is a misnomer because we're in COVID era. In 2019,
all bets are off in 2020.
In 2020, that's super off. And plus, I've seen a few of those on Zoom. Trust me. It doesn't create what you've just described, which is the audience actually buying into the idea that's being sold to them or challenging them in some way. So it's really interesting to hear a little bit of behind the scenes, which is not only putting on an event that shares ideas worth sharing, but helping that person who shares the idea to share the idea in the best possible way. I find that
lots
fascinating.
of sharing. Lots of we give, that's the way I see it. And so Nick, my husband, was still technically like the director of it, and I was like, I nominally gave myself like marketing and event manager, director person. I was like, but we organized the whole thing together. Then Nick got really involved with another project that he's working on, and it was either a little bit like we either just don't do this anymore after the 2018 event, or I was like, well, I'm going to have to take it on. And I was willing to do that, but I was also like, it's going to be a lot of work. But I was so proud of what we did for the 2018 event. We had such an amazing lineup, and with Tara, our speaker coach's help, and everyone in the team's help, it really was a brilliant event. And I think we curated a really, really great mix of people. But in some ways, it sounds really silly, but we kind of, the first big event that we did was almost too good. The feedback was so glowing that we were like, how are we going to top this? Like literally, how are we going to improve on this? Because we actually did such a good job. But then when I took over, I just sort of was like, well, I want to lean into what I think are have been our best talks. And it's not everyone's talks that has been excellent. But for me, it was a lot of like personal stories actually, and in some ways for our sort of I guess for our 2020 event, which feels like so long ago, but it was only earlier this year, we leaned into more personal stories in some ways, and in some ways the ideas being shared were slightly on the back, a bit behind that, which we're now going to sort of actually for the next event, which should be in 2021, we're actually I've like injected more ideas back into it. But we leaned into that because we had an opportunity where we had Tara, our speaker coach, and we had all of us willing to support these people, that we could actually choose people that were not professional speakers. And that was actually something that I wanted to lean into. I was a bit like, I don't necessarily want it to just be all really professional speakers, because we have this opportunity and this platform to give someone, for some of them, it was like their very first kind of speaking opportunity, which it seems crazy to do that in front of 900 people. But we had the support system there to do that. And also one thing that I was very specific about was I was like, if the person is not good enough to be on the stage, we're not going to put them on that stage. And it's not because of, reputation, or it's because I don't want to see someone like fall to pieces and crumble in front of 900 people live on stage. Like, I don't want to put anyone in that situation. Yeah. So I make it very explicit to all of our speakers. I say, if we don't think you're quite there yet for your talk, when it comes to it, we will say you're not ready, and we'll hold you back for a future event.
And that's just being kind and helping them, because you're not in the business of setting anybody up for failure. And for people listening who are perhaps planning on one day giving their own TEDx talk, or just even on a smaller scale would like to start speaking at conferences or at roundtables in their own profession. I mean, just some feedback from me. I do public speaking in my profession, even outside of my profession, when it comes to inclusion inside the financial services sector, being a young male of foreign origin in a sector that's very much sort of older English gentleman, so to speak. But I had my first heckler earlier this year, in a conference that had 600 people in the audience. And it wasn't heckling in a bad way. It was heckling as in somebody got fairly excited for something I was saying.
Like, bravo!
But it throws you off completely, right? You're in there, you're in your zone, and you go, oh yeah, that's right. And you say sort of, and it thankfully I had a few hours behind me, so to speak, in terms of, mileage, so to speak, of doing it, that I could just bounce back to where I was. But that can throw people off. And you're absolutely right, for the sake of the event, but for the sake of the person that's up there, it's great to have that coaching. Liam, I want to segue into something else, and this is, I've got a biased view on this, of course, because I've signed up to this other project that you've prolifically been able to launch during this lockdown period. Could you tell us a little bit about Speaker Circle and what you plan on doing with this new project of yours as well?
Yeah, so in some ways, unsurprisingly, if you know what TEDx is all about, people's organizing an event where you need speakers to stand on a stage and deliver it. So Speaker Circle is a website it's almost a bit like a LinkedIn for people who are public speakers or want to be public speakers. You sign up as a speaker. You can fill out your profile, again, a little bit like a sort of LinkedIn profile. It's all about your speaking career, about your experience, about maybe like what your day job is and how that is related to your what you want to talk about. And then you can put in what your topics are, that like your hot topics that you can talk about. What are your expertise? So you sign up as a speaker. It's kind of it's quite user-led. So it's set up so that users sign up. Then organizers of events who have speaking opportunities can also do the same thing. They can upload the information about their event, about their speaking opportunity, and then it's about connecting people. So until you signed up, you can't actually sort of message each other, but then you can message a speaker about an event, and a speaker can apply for your event. It's, in some ways, you've got these speaking agencies where you sign up as a speaker to an agency, and then the agency will find you speaking opportunities, which is all well and good, and it works for some people, but this is more of it's user-led. It's you have to put a bit of effort into it yourself. You have to fill out your account and then do a little bit of searching for opportunities. And also, I mean, in the times that we're in, there aren't that many speaking opportunities in person, but there actually are a lot of online speaking opportunities. So it came out of my experience of trying to find speakers for TEDx. It actually is really hard to find really good speakers. And again, it's not that whether they're professional or not. It's partly based on who they are, what their story is, where are we going to find them? Like literally, where are we going to find them? Are we going to find them in the local community? Are we going to find them in London? Or could we be more global about it? Could we look around the world for these stories? So it's a kind of about how do you find the right stories for the right event, the right ideas for the right event. So at the moment, it's just a website. It's just a simple little website. It's just a website where people can sign up, and it will expand, it will grow. But it's a kind of user-led thing. I've had a few people that say, "Oh, is this a speaking agency?" Well, no, it's not a speaking agency. I'm kind of giving you the tool to do the work, so I don't have to do the work.
Yeah,
that's ultimately the idea.
Yeah, but you're doing it in an interesting way, because once I set up my profile there, what I felt I got as a byproduct of it was a really good speaker profile page. It's laid out in a way that the coding is done really well. The pictures, they pop out, the expertise and the areas that I think I can deliver value in, they all pop out really nicely. And to do that on your own on WordPress or something, that takes a bit of time and a bit of investment.
I didn't do it all by myself. I have my friend Ollie. So my friend Ollie, who actually works for the company Merlin, who are all the theme parks, the theme parks, all the ones in the UK and Legoland, that sort of thing. He works in their IT department, and but he also is like a tech internet whiz, and he has his own sort of company that he runs on the side, which is domains. It's called Stred Tech. It's like domain where you can buy your own domain name and hosting. So obviously my website is hosted on his I bought the domain through him and the hosting is through him, but he also is just like a internet coding, like know everything, do everything. So, and also we were both furloughed from our sort of day jobs in April, and it was a little bit of like so now what are we going to do? And I had this idea I did already have this idea for Speaker Circle, and also my original actual idea for speaker circle. It wasn't even speaker circle. It was a different idea, and it was all events based. It was a kind of TED style event that I was going to run myself, which still might happen. So I would give away too many details. And in January, I was like, right, I'm going to start doing all the things I need to do to get these events going. Or luckily I didn't plan any events, because obviously, and then in March we were like, what's this thing going on around the world? Yeah. And I kind of pivoted. I sort of, the speaker circle website was like the second part of my plan that was going to come next. But because of the situation that I found myself in, I had a load of free time from being furloughed. And then my friend Ollie was furloughed. I was like, maybe I should speak to Ollie about my idea and see if he can help me out in inverted commas. Like, if you don't help me out, like, I won't be able to do this. So yeah, and then since then it's now been 6 months, which actually have flown by. And it took us sort of 6 months to get it to a point where we were launching the website. And you know what? The website's not perfect. I look at it and I'm like, oh, there's definitely things to change. But we also got to a point where we're like, let's just make it go live. Let's get it to the point where it's usable for the core function. And then afterwards, we'll add in the extra things, the extra bits. And also maybe eventually, and I say maybe, it will happen, we'll start doing events as well. The original idea of doing the events will happen, but they'll have to happen next year.
This concept of the minimal viable product is one that I'm a big fan of. The Inside Kingston project podcast is exactly one of those projects, and a lot of our previous guests have all launched their businesses on that sort of minimal viable product basis, Liam. Yeah. So I definitely applaud you guys for that. So Liam, you're a fairly young guy, and it seems to me that you not only envisage these various projects, but you then go out there and then act on them. You find a partner to buddy up with you, but then go out and act upon them. We have quite a few younger listeners here on the Inside Kingston podcast. Could you just talk to us a little bit about, well, one, where perhaps that comes from in your own life, and how do you find the energy, the motivation, and perhaps even where you find some of these ideas to then motivate you to just be constantly building and shipping the next thing?
I like that you said fairly young. I'm fairly young. I don't know.
I tried.
No, I know you're fairly young. I love to fixate on stuff like that, though. So my dad owns his own business, or ran his own business, and I think, I'm not saying, and to be honest, it's in an industry. It was like air conditioning industry, very sort of manufacturing, very very hands-on, which is not very me. But he always ran his own business, and in some ways, I think I'm kind of inspired by that idea of someone that is their day in, day out, what they want to do is like what they want to do, running their own business from scratch. And he's always done that. So I think a part of me is a bit like, no, I think I've actually kind of subconsciously taken inspiration from my dad in some ways. So I guess finding the time, I don't get bored easily. I just don't allow myself to get bored. I kind of see, like, sounds really weird, but like my relaxation is often like working on these projects, these like side hustles. And I mentioned earlier, but I recently, because I was thinking about Speaker Circle, and this being like another in quite a long series in some ways of things I've done on the side of my like degree or my day job that is kind of a business, but I've often not thought about it so much that it's like a business. But so when I first left university, I teamed up with some friends and we started making corporate videos, because we did the film degree, which I was talking about earlier, film degree. Mm-hmm. Let's make corporate videos. And that happened, and then we stopped doing it. Then I did photography. I started doing wedding photography. And I did quite a lot of weddings, actually. But also to a certain extent, and I guess this is advice for people, I was like, could I see myself shooting weddings 24/7? Could that be my job? And I was like, no, I don't really want to. So I was happy to do weddings and things. I shot a wedding in France. I shot a wedding in Rome. I shot a wedding in upstate New York. And it was all great. But then I kind of got to a point where I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I also had a back issue, which meant I couldn't carry heavy cameras anymore. And I think for me, the learning from that was, could I literally see myself doing this 24/7? Do I enjoy doing it? Yes, I enjoy doing it. Could I see myself doing it 24/7? No. there's only so much you can pretend to care about people's weddings, which is what you have to do when you're a wedding photographer. You have to be interested in every tiny little detail about their wedding, and ultimately you're a bit like, yep. Lots of weddings look very similar. And you have to fake it really well. I then started to take photos and sell them as artwork. That didn't go too well. Actually, before all of this, I had editing software, and I used to edit show reels for people. So like actors who wanted show reels of their videos of them doing like performances and stuff that they would then put on the internet, I would edit their show reels. That didn't last very long. I then worked with a friend as part of a marketing agency. And that did go well, but then I moved. This was when I was in Kent, but then I moved away from Kent into London, and it was a proximity thing. We couldn't really do it distanced, not at least at the time. So that I actually learned a lot about working with small businesses then, and what small businesses need and how they have to basically do everything themselves, which I experienced that multiple times. When you're a small business, you basically have to do everything yourself, and you have to learn how to do everything yourself.
Huge lesson in that. And a lot of our previous guests have definitely highlighted that as well, Liam. So for sure, that's really interesting you've said that.
And also, I guess in my sort of day job marketing, I've often worked for small businesses, and I often see from afar what they're doing. And I'm also like, I take inspiration from them, but I also see how difficult it is. But yet still here I am setting up another business, setting up another platform, another thing. And I guess it's just sort of all of those things. I don't see like all of those things are technically almost like failures, because only one of them actually was something I did full time. The rest were all things I did on the side. So in some ways you could see them as failures, but every single one of those things that I tried and then stopped doing, or tried and failed at, I learned something from them. And I guess taking inspiration from my dad about the, and ultimately I do want to do my own thing. That is something that's very important to me. I want to be the person that's like spearheading the ideas and the change, which I get to do with Speaker Circle. And to a certain extent, I get to do that with the TEDx event, but it's a TEDx event, and there are rules and parameters that you have to stick to. And me being the controversial filmmaking rule breaker, I'm a bit like, I kind of want to break the rules, but I know I can't. So I'm like, well, I can break the rules if it's my own event or my own company. I can break all the rules.
Absolutely. Well, look, I will say this, your story there for me is inspirational. And if nothing else, it just proves that, like a much wiser guy than me once said about 3,000 years ago, the obstacle is indeed the way, so those obstacles, it's just good mileage, isn't it? It's working up to those 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about in terms of really honing in your skills and finding the thing that you wake up in the morning feeling like you want to do to add value to the community or to your peers or to the society as a whole. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think actually I thought about also what some of the things that I would impart to other people if they were starting a business or starting like a side hustle on the side of their job. Or it's like, one of the big things I would always say to them is, don't overthink it. Don't overthink it, because I'm a terrible overthinker. I will come up with an idea, and one day I'm like, this is the best idea ever. I'm going to do all of this. I'm going to do all these things. And the next day I'm like, what was I thinking? That was a terrible idea. And generally it's not a terrible idea. I'm just overthinking it. Sometimes just doing and not overthinking is one of the best things to do, because also not overthinking and doing just means that you're literally doing something, and you never know what's going to come from you doing that thing. That could be a quote. That could be a really great, confusing quote. Another thing, I was like, think about how something can actually be scaled. And this was an issue we had actually when I was working with a friend with the marketing agency. There was an element of, well, we used to sort of work for people on an hourly basis. And I was like, well, there's only two of us. There's only so much time in the week, and there's only so much that we can charge people for our time. To a certain extent, it was like, well, how would we actually scale this if we didn't want to sort of like take on staff, if we didn't want to bring extra people in, we just want to keep it nice and small and like sort of unique just to us. How could that be scaled? And it never really got to a point where it was an issue, but it was something that I was always thinking about. And the other thing was like my wedding photography. Like, do you actually want to be doing this full time? And I think that also is something that people need to question when they're with their day jobs. Do you actually want to spend 30 to 40 hours of a week doing this thing? Maybe if you don't like doing it, you should do something else, which is easier said than done. But it's the same thing when you're setting up a business or setting up like a platform like Speaker Circle. Do I want to be managing this website 24/7? It's something that I have to think about. It's something I have to consider. And I think that applies to a lot of people. And I said this earlier, but like learn how to do everything, like literally, because you never also know when someone is actually going to like let you down. You might have someone that's helping you out, but you never know when they're going to go, I don't want to do this anymore. And you need to sort of know how to do everything.
Those are huge,
so
huge lessons.
Easy, attainable, not going to take much effort. No effort. Just learn how to do everything.
I think that pretty much sums it up. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people will get a lot out of just sitting down maybe for a moment introspectively and just thinking about some of the things you said there, especially if they find themselves in a place where, the whole pandemic has actually made them rethink some aspects of their lives. This is the time to think about it, and perhaps using the framework that Liam has just described there. Liam, let me ask you this. When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I would literally say the website I have just launched. I am a bit of a, I don't actually, despite the fact we've been talking a lot about the past, I do like to look forward, like just forward trajectory. I guess my sort of proudest achievement in some sort of, which is a kind of a hybrid of sort of career and self-employment, I guess, is the TEDx events. Being able to sell out the theatre on a consistent basis is an amazing achievement, and I know it's an amazing achievement. And the fact that we started it from scratch, like there was no TEDx Kingston before we started it, and now we could, if COVID wasn't putting a little bit of a roadblock in the way, we could easily, and I say easily in a slightly sort of arrogant way, but we could easily sell out that theatre every single year and have a day of amazing talks every single year, and it would continue being this brilliant event. I know that we could do that. But for me, the future, the sort of looking to the future is the thing that I don't like about that situation is that it's not my own brand. It's not my own company in some ways. It's the TEDx brand is what helps sell the tickets, obviously. So I guess in some ways for me, the next step, like being super proud of that achievement, the next step for me is, well, how could I turn that into something that's actually like start from scratch, as in very, very much from scratch, before the TEDx name or before the logo was created, start from scratch and then have a similar sort of trajectory. And I guess in some ways that is what I'm trying to do with Speaker Circle, is start from the beginning again and build from there. And then, so that's why I'm most proud of it, because 6 months of COVID, where also it's affected so many people in so many different ways, but also it's been an easy thing for people to use as an excuse for not doing things. And sometimes you do need to pivot. You need to, like, something comes along like this and derails where you thought you were going to go, and you need to think, well, hang on a second, let me change what I was thinking and try something different. And that's what I had to do. And now I'm just really proud that we managed to get something live. I thought it was quite funny. We started the website in first lockdown, and then we launched it in second lockdown. So in third lockdown, we'll be millionaires.
Absolutely, no doubt.
No, I just, not that that is my goal, but I thought it was funny that it was like, we never really thought there was going to be a second lockdown, and then here we are.
Well, it to me, it sounds like there's exciting times ahead, Liam.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I sort of, in some ways, I'm sort of like an overachiever, but I'm also like a rule breaker. I like to break the rules. So I don't think my trajectory would be a normal trajectory, but then I wouldn't want it to be that way.
Very cool. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So Liam, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
I like that you think I have enough time to relax now. I do actually like to relax, like building a website now. I guess I spend time with my husband and my cats. I've got 3 cats. Nick and I, we have quite similar interests, fortunately. We both love like jazz. So we love going to watch live jazz, going to Ronnie Scott's. We love traveling, but we both like traveling comfortably in a nice Airbnb. So I guess going on holiday, but Nick and I, we love going to America quite a lot. We both have a bit of a love for Americana. So we go to Palm Springs. I wish we could go to Palm Springs right now. But we were planning to go to Palm Springs for Christmas, but that's not going to happen. But to be honest, the last time we were in Palm Springs was literally about this time last year, and I was in Palm Springs. We were staying in this like gorgeous mid-century modern house with a swimming pool. I also love swimming; that's my thing. And I was working on my business plan for the events that I was going to launch in January. I was sat at my computer in Palm Springs working on a business plan. And to me, I was like, this is heaven. I'm in heaven.
Very cool.
And also drinking some cocktails and drinking gorgeous Californian wine. And in some ways, I sort of said to myself, even in that moment, I was like, this is my ideal situation. I would love to be able to like work in a space which is also a recreational space. So I could be, working on my website, tip-tapping away at my computer, and then I'm like, oh, I'm just going to take a 20-minute dip in the pool.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
This is a funny one and Nick, my husband, will be like, don't lie. I don't read that much. I don't read very often. I do enjoy reading to a certain extent, but my brain wanders too much. I also, particularly when it's when it's a storybook, when it's like an engaging story, I often, and also I think because of my sort of filmmaking background, I see things really visually, and I will read the words and I'll start wandering off into like a tangent of like almost like a filmmaking tangent, and I lose track of where I'm reading. So I'm not that good at reading. I'm not that good at focusing on one thing for a long space of time. But I did read, I'm sort of like 2/3 of the way through a book. It's called Scotty Bowers, and it's called Full Service: My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secret Sex Lives of the Stars. And it is a biography about this guy who actually died in the last few years. He was kind of sort of like he worked in Hollywood, and actually the Netflix TV series called Hollywood is kind of about him.
Right.
It was he had a gas station in Hollywood, and he used to use the gas station to find like the stars, people that they could have some fun with. And this was all in the sort of like 20s, 30s, 40s. And he built up this network of Hollywood stars who he would find entertainment for them, let's say, and men and women, and men with women and women with women. And it was all very gender fluid. And he's bisexual, and he would also get in on the action, let's say. But I found it interesting because I do love that sort of classical Hollywood era, and also being a gay man and part of the LGBT community, I'm interested in that sort of world, that like what people had to do so some of these like Hollywood stars, they were gay men, they were gay women, they were bisexual people, and they couldn't be their authentic self in this Hollywood system that was set up for them. And Scotty was there to fulfill their every need, but all under the radar, all secret. And but it's also a sort of like trashy expose about stars, and it's actually a really good read. But also they made a documentary about it in the last few years that's really good.
That sounds like a really interesting read for sure. And I think a question that is probably even more pertinent, and this is I'm curious about personally, are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I was like, we've got so much choice. So actually a film that's really stuck with me, and this is my like barometer. I might really enjoy a film, but it's like if it sticks with me and I come back to it and I start thinking about it randomly, is when I'm like, ooh, that's a film. There's nothing worse than watching a film and then a week later you're like, what happened in that film? I can't remember a single thing about it. That's for me is like a barometer of whether it's good or not. So the film Roma by Alfonso Cuarón came out in 2018. It's on Netflix, black and white, about Mexico City sort of well-off family, and it follows their like housemaid, and it follows her. it's such a stunning film. It's so beautifully shot, and Alfonso Cuarón, who's the director, actually did the cinematography himself, which is insane. It should have won the Oscar. I can't remember what won the Oscar 2018. It probably should have won the Oscar. But that was a film that I watched probably in 2018, and every now and again I just sort of think about that film and I go, ooh. And I think, I need to watch that again, but I'm going to have to be in the right frame of mind. So that's an amazing film. We recently watched, because it was Halloween and I love horror films, there's a streaming platform called Shudder, which is just for horror films, and there's a film on there called Hell House LLC from 2015. It's like a found footage, sort of Blair Witch Project style found footage of these guys in America, I think it's New England, but they're setting up one of these like American scare houses in a little town, and then they realize that the scare house is actually haunted. It's super cheesy and silly, but it's all about found footage, and they're filming everything, and they have all of these cameras. But I watch a lot of horror films, and it takes quite a lot to scare me and to freak me out, but this film kind of freaked me out. There were bits in it that I was like, this is like, in an enjoyable way. I was like, yeah, this is creepy. Like they're setting up the house to be all scary to these people with all of these models, and then they realize that the models are like moving, and it's just, yeah, no, it's good. If you don't like horror films, do not watch it. But if you do like horror films, Hell House LLC on Shudder is really good. And then actually a third one is on Disney Plus. I thought about it, and I went for ones that people could watch. So it's on Disney Plus. There's a documentary called Howard. It came out in 2018, but it was only recently put onto Disney Plus. And it's about Howard Ashman, who was he was part of the duo that did all of the music in Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, and Aladdin. And Aladdin was Beauty and the Beast was the last film. So he also did the music for Little Shop of Horrors, the musical. So he did the music for Little Shop of Horrors and the lyrics, and then he did the lyrics for, like, he did all the lyrics for the songs that we all know from Aladdin, and those songs that if you're sort of around my age, like, and growing up as a kid, you know those songs, you love those songs, and he was the one that basically wrote those songs and wrote the lyrics to them, like the genie in Aladdin, his song about that sort of thing. So he was a gay man, and he died of AIDS. So it's not a cheerful film, but it's all about him writing the musical Little Shop of Horrors, getting a bit of notoriety, then Disney being like, oh, we want this person to come and help us out with our films. And he basically in some ways, him and the team behind the music kind of transformed those films. They weren't going to be making musicals in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. They were going to just make normal Disney films. And Disney at the time for their films weren't doing very well. And it was those musicals that became like the big hits that they are. And then the follow-up, the film that they made after he died, was Lion King, and how much of a huge hit was Lion King.
Wow.
But he was kind of one of the people that was like, these films should be musicals. The classic Disney films from the past were all musicals, and he was that person. But it's all about how he was so influential in that world. But whilst he was working on these films, he was dying, and no one knew about it. So he was dying of AIDS, and no one knew about it. And so it's not a cheerful film, and it's not very Disney considering it's on Disney Plus. But it's actually a really, really interesting watch. So it's called Howard. Yeah. And his name was Howard Ashman. But
And finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm Liam Rogers HQ, like headquarters HQ on Twitter. But Speaker Circle is speakercircle.space, because it's a space for speakers. And I'm on Twitter, Liam Rogers HQ on Instagram. I don't post much on Instagram, to be honest. And on Twitter, you can find me. And then TEDx Kingston. It's TEDxKingston.com is the website. But if you look up TEDx Kingston on Google, it will come up.
Yeah, and for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add all those resources to the show notes. Liam, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to talk. It is really good to talk, and it's really nice to virtually meet you. Maybe one day we'll actually get to meet each other in person.
Absolutely. It would be a pleasure.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.